In this video, I'll show you how to interpret the result from a moderation analysis with two moderators, where one is a categorical moderator and the other one is a continuous moderator. For this, we first look at our situation. We have exposure to an anti-smoking campaign that is trying to predict the attitude towards smoking. And we have two moderators, contact with smokers, so how much time you have contact with smokers, which is a continuous moderator, and we have the personal smoking status, so either you are a non-smoker, a former smoker, or a smoker. And in process we have to identify which is which, so which category corresponds to what. So if we look at our data set, which is here, we see that we have for status 3 the non-smoker, the smoker, and the former smoker, which is coded as 0, 1, and 2. So the 0 stands for the non-smoker, the 2 stands for the smoker, and the 1 stands for the former smoker. So if we go back to our analysis, we see that process will make dummy variables for us, namely Z1 and Z2 for the categories of the smoking status, and we can see that we have the status values 0, 1, and 2, so the non-smokers, the former smokers, or the smokers. If we are creating dummy variables, you only need 2 actual dummy variables because the other one will be put in the constant. So for Z1 we see that all values are 0 except for the case where smoking status is 1. So this essentially states that smoke status 1 is on and the rest is off. And for Z2, we see that everything is off except for the final one, where the smoking status is indicated by 2. This one is on and the rest is off. So it essentially indicates that Z1 stands for the former smokers and Z2 stands for the smokers. So this is indicated by the coding. The next results show us the model summary, which essentially gives us the amount of explained variance. We test if this is significant or not with an f-test, and we have our model summary with the beta coefficients for the constant, the exposure, the contact with smokers, and we have 3 interactions and the 2 categories that we have for the levels of contact. For the interaction terms, we need to look at the product term key, because that defines what the interaction actually is. So interaction 1 is indicated by the interaction between exposure and contact. Interaction 2 is indicated here is the interaction of exposure by Z1, and Z1 was the former smoker, so it's either you are a former smoker or you are not a former smoker, so this can either be 0 or 1, so this exposure part counts or does not count. And finally we have the interaction 3, which is the exposure with Z2, which stands again for the smokers. So now we know what the interaction terms are. So we can see the beta coefficients, the direction if it's positive or negative, and it is tested again with a t-value, and we also see the lower and upper limits of the confidence intervals for these. Now, if we want to know where the differences are exactly on the 3 levels of the moderator contact that we asked for, so the 1 standard deviation above and below, we need to determine if there actually is an interaction. And in this case we see that for the interaction 1, this one is significant, it's lower than 0.05. For interaction 2, this one is also significant with a p-value lower than 0.05. For interaction 3, it's not non-significant, as we can see here, but because there are at least 2 interactions that are significant, process produces the conditional effects analysis. Again, we also see that R squared changed, tested here in the test of the higher order unconditional interactions, and this is essentially an F-test that's performed on this, again indicating that we have some significant interactions here. And then we get to our conditional effects. And what we see here is at the low levels, minus 1.8, so that's 1 standard deviation below the mean of the average contacts for the non-smokers, the former smokers and the smokers. We see the effect at that specific level, and we see also that effect being tested with the upper and lower limits. We see the same for the average amount of contacts for the 3 levels of the smoking status, and finally we see the same results for the high levels of contact, so people that have a lot of contact with smokers but do not smoke themselves, or are a formal smoker, or they also smoke themselves. We see the effect for these 3. So it's essentially combining the different categories with the different levels of the contact moderator. And again, this is tested with a t-test. This is the results. Finally, we see the data for visualizing the conditional effects. And we already added this to a syntax in our previous video. And what this produces is essentially a graph of the regression line for each of these effects that we see here. So I already made this plot. So if we look here, we see for the non-smokers that are this color, so the people that have a lot of contact with smokers, there isn't really a difference between the exposure and attitude. So the more they get exposed to the campaign, the attitude towards smoking essentially stays the same for the non-smokers. Though if you are a former smoker and you are exposed to the campaign, we see that for this specific level, for the people that have a lot of contact with smokers, it drops slightly, and for the people that are smokers themselves, it also seems not to have any effect here. So this indicates the regression slopes for the 3 levels of the smoking status, non-smokers, former smokers, and smokers, and for the 3 vocal points that we're looking at for contact. So that's 1 standard deviation below the mean, at the mean, and 1 standard deviation above the mean, and each line represents one of these. So this is how we interpret the results of a moderation analysis with 2 moderators, 1 categorical and 1 continuous.